Jamal Carter, a 17-year-old high school senior, had just finished basketball practice when he decided to take a shortcut home through an alley near his school. It was a routine he had followed many times before, but tonight was different. As he walked through the dimly lit path, flashing red and blue lights suddenly blinded him. "Hands up!" a voice shouted. Jamal froze, his heart pounding as he raised his hands. Two officers, one of them Sergeant Rick Donovan, stepped out of the patrol car. Donovan, a hardened officer with a reputation for aggressive policing, scanned Jamal with suspicion. "We got a report of a robbery nearby," Donovan said, stepping closer. "You match the description. Black hoodie, jeans, about 6 feet tall. Sound familiar?" Jamal's breath hitched. "I just came from practice. I didn't do anything." "Empty your pockets," Donovan ordered. Jamal hesitated but complied, pulling out his phone, earbuds, and a few crumpled dollars. Donovan's partner, Officer Mills, patted Jamal down while Donovan inspected the contents. Then, Donovan held up a small bag of what appeared to be drugs. Well, look what we have here." Jamal's eyes widened. "That's not mine. I swear, I don't do drugs." "Tell it to the judge," Donovan sneered before shoving Jamal against the car. The cold metal of the cuffs clamped around his wrists. The reality of the situation sunk in as neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering among themselves. Jamal was pushed into the back of the squad car, his future now uncertain. As they drove off, he could hear Donovan chuckle. "This one's a slam dunk." Little did he know, the fight for justice was just beginning. Jamal sat in the cold, dimly lit interrogation room, his hands still cuffed to the metal table. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting eerie shadows on the wall. Across from him, Sergeant Donovan leaned back in his chair, smirking as he tapped his fingers against a thick folder. "You're in a lot of trouble, kid," Donovan said. "Possession, intent to distribute, and let's not forget resisting arrest." Jamal's eyes widened. "Resisting? I didn't resist. You planted that on me." Donovan chuckled. "That's a cute story. Problem is, my body cam footage shows otherwise. You made a sudden move, and we had to restrain you. It's all there on record." Jamal clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. "That's a lie. There were people watching. They know I didn't do anything." Donovan shrugged. "Witnesses can be unreliable. But you, my friend, are in a world of hurt unless you start talking. Who were you working for? Where's the rest of the stash?" Jamal shook his head furiously. "I told you, I don't do drugs. I was walking home." Just then, the door swung open, and a tall, stern-looking woman entered. Attorney Vanessa Brooks, a well-respected defense lawyer, placed her briefcase on the table and sat beside Jamal. She glanced at Donovan before turning to Jamal. "Don't say another word," she said firmly. Donovan scowled. "You're wasting your time, counselor. This kid is guilty as sin." Vanessa crossed her arms. "We'll see about that." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Jamal was led to the defense table. The judge, an imposing woman with sharp eyes, banged her gavel. "Order in the court." Vanessa Brooks stood up. "Your Honor, my client has been falsely accused. The prosecution has built its case on fabricated evidence and unreliable testimony." Across the aisle, the prosecutor smirked. "The evidence speaks for itself. The drugs were found on the defendant, and Sergeant Donovan's body cam corroborates the arrest." Vanessa took a deep breath. "That's what they want us to believe. But the truth is that evidence was planted, and we can prove it." A ripple of gasps spread through the courtroom. Donovan, seated near the prosecution, stiffened. "I'd like to call an expert witness to the stand," Vanessa continued. "Detective Alan Fisher, an independent forensic investigator." A man in a crisp suit stepped forward, swearing in before taking his seat. Vanessa approached him. "Detective Fisher, can you tell us what you found when analyzing the body cam footage?" Fisher adjusted his glasses. "Yes, ma'am. Upon closer examination, we found a 3-second gap in the footage, right before the alleged discovery of the drugs. This suggests possible tampering." The courtroom erupted into whispers. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Tampering?" Fisher nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The video was edited. The unaltered version from the police database does not show any drugs before Sergeant Donovan reached into Jamal's pocket." Vanessa turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client was framed, and now we have proof." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the prosecutor. "Mr. Daniels, do you have an explanation for this discrepancy in the footage?" The prosecutor hesitated. Your Honor, I was not made aware of any tampering. This is the first time I am hearing about this supposed missing footage. Vanessa stepped forward confidently. Then I suggest we subpoena the original, untampered footage from the department's database. If there's nothing to hide, then there should be no problem. Donovan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge turned to him. Sergeant Donovan, do you have anything to say regarding this matter? Beads of sweat formed on Donovan's forehead. I don't know what they're talking about. The footage is what it is. Detective Fisher spoke up. With all due respect, Your Honor, the evidence suggests otherwise. I have submitted my full forensic report, which details the precise point of alteration. If needed, I can testify further. The judge nodded. Very well. Court is adjourned until we receive the original footage. And Sergeant Donovan, I strongly suggest you prepare to answer some difficult questions. Jamal exhaled deeply as Vanessa patted his shoulder. We're getting closer to the truth, she whispered. Stay strong. The next day in court, the prosecution presented the subpoenaed body cam footage. The room fell silent as the unaltered video played on the large screen. The jury watched in shock as the screen revealed Donovan slipping the small bag of drugs into Jamal's pocket before pretending to discover it. The judge's expression darkened. Sergeant Donovan, explain yourself, Donovan stammered. Your Honor, this must be some kind of mistake. The footage must have been. Enough. The judge interrupted. This court will not tolerate corruption. Prosecutor Daniels, I expect an immediate review of this officer's conduct. Vanessa stood up. Your Honor, with this evidence, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. The judge nodded. Motion granted. Jamal Carter, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted, and for the first time in weeks, Jamal felt hope. Jamal stood outside the courthouse, inhaling the crisp air of freedom. The weight that had crushed his chest for weeks had finally lifted. His mother clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face. I told you we'd fight this, she whispered. Vanessa Brooks stepped beside them, a satisfied smile on her face. Justice was served today, but this isn't over. We need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Reporters surrounded them, microphones thrust forward. Jamal, how do you feel now that the charges have been dropped? Jamal met their gaze, his voice steady. I feel relieved, but also angry. This shouldn't have happened in the first place. There are other kids like me who aren't lucky enough to prove their innocence. That has to change. Inside the courthouse, Sergeant Donovan was led away in handcuffs, his once arrogant expression replaced with fear. The same system he had manipulated had turned against him. As Jamal walked away with his family, he felt a newfound purpose. This was just the beginning of his fight for justice. Jamal sat in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Though he was free, the scars of his wrongful arrest still lingered. The nightmares, the fear of walking alone, the distrust in the system, it all remained. He knew he couldn't just move on like nothing had happened. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa Brooks. Jamal, I have an idea, she said. I want you to speak at a community forum about your experience. Your story could help change things. Jamal hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready. Vanessa's voice was gentle but firm. You're stronger than you think, and your voice matters. A week later, Jamal stood before a packed auditorium. I never thought I'd be here, he began. But what happened to me happens to too many people. It has to stop. As he spoke, he saw nods, heard murmurs of agreement, and felt a newfound strength. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn his pain into something bigger than himself. The fight for justice had only begun. The courtroom was silent as Jamal's defense attorney, Marcus Reed, called his final witness to the stand. The tension was palpable. Jamal's mother sat on the edge of her seat, hands clasped together in desperate hope. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Thompson entered. The trial had been grueling, with Officer Grant's testimony painting Jamal as a criminal. But today, everything was about to change. The defense's witness was an unexpected one, Officer Grant's own partner, Officer Daniel Hayes. He looked uneasy as he sat down, avoiding Grant's glare. Officer Hayes, Reed began, do you recall the night of Jamal Carter's arrest? Hayes swallowed hard. Yes, he answered. Can you tell the court exactly what happened? Reed pressed. There was a long pause. Hayes shifted uncomfortably, then finally spoke. I saw Officer Grant place the bag of drugs in the boy's backpack. Gasps filled the courtroom. Jamal's eyes widened in shock. His mother let out a soft cry. "What did you say?" Judge Thompson asked, her voice sharp. "I saw him plant the evidence," Hayes repeated, his voice stronger this time. "Jamal Carter is innocent." Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Officer Grant stood up abruptly, his face red with fury. "You're lying," he shouted, but the damage was done. Reed turned to the judge. "Your Honor, in light of this testimony, I move to dismiss all charges against my client." Judge Thompson banged her gavel. "Order in the court." She looked at Hayes. "Are you willing to swear under oath that your testimony is true?" "Yes, Your Honor," Hayes said firmly. Judge Thompson nodded and turned to the prosecution. "I will need to deliberate, but the credibility of this case has been severely compromised." Jamal felt his heart race with hope. For the first time since his arrest, he could see a light at the end of the tunnel. The courtroom was filled with murmurs as everyone awaited Judge Thompson's final decision. Jamal sat anxiously beside his lawyer, his fingers gripping the wooden table. His mother held his hand tightly, whispering a silent prayer. The judge cleared her throat. "Order in the court," she commanded, silencing the room. After reviewing Officer Hayes' testimony and considering the inconsistencies in Officer Grant's report, I find that there is significant doubt regarding the prosecution's case. Jamal's heart pounded as he held his breath. Judge Thompson continued, "It is the duty of this court to ensure justice prevails. Given the evidence presented, all charges against Jamal Carter are hereby dropped." Gasps echoed across the courtroom before cheers erupted. Jamal's mother burst into tears, hugging her son tightly. Officer Grant's face turned pale as he realized his deception had been exposed. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, but the bailiff was already approaching him. Prosecutor Sullivan stood up, clearly flustered. "Your Honor, we." Judge Thompson cut him off. "I suggest you reconsider your stance on blindly trusting corrupt officers." Reed turned to Jamal with a smile. "You're free, Jamal." The teenager exhaled sharply, tears brimming in his eyes. He was free. He could finally go home. As he stepped out of the courtroom, he knew this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a moment of justice that would echo far beyond these walls. The sun felt warmer than it had in weeks as Jamal and his mother stepped out of the courthouse. Reporters swarmed them, microphones and cameras flashing, but all Jamal wanted was to go home. "Jamal, how do you feel about the verdict?" one journalist called out. Jamal glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. He took a deep breath. "I feel relieved. I feel like justice was finally served." His mother squeezed his hand. "And we won't stop here," she added. "There are too many other kids like my son, falsely accused. We're going to fight for them." As they walked toward their car, Marcus Reed caught up to them. "Jamal," he said, handing him a card. "I know you once wanted to be a lawyer. If you're still interested, give me a call when you're ready." Jamal looked at the card and then at his lawyer. "I will," he promised. As they drove away, Jamal gazed out the window, a newfound sense of purpose filling his heart. This wasn't just the end of a nightmare. It was the beginning of a mission. Months had passed since Jamal's trial, but the impact of his case had not faded. His story had gone viral, sparking outrage and demands for police reform. Activists, lawyers, and community leaders rallied behind his cause. Jamal, now a senior in high school, had become a symbol of resilience. He spoke at town halls, sharing his experience and advocating for change. "If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone," he told crowds. "We need accountability." Meanwhile, Officer Grant faced his own reckoning. The police department launched an internal investigation, and within weeks he was dismissed. Criminal charges loomed over him. Despite the pain he endured, Jamal knew this was just the beginning. He had a voice, and he intended to use it. A year had passed since Jamal's trial, but the fight for justice was far from over. Now a freshman at Howard University, he had taken his painful experience and turned it into purpose. He was studying law, determined to help others who found themselves in the same nightmare he had endured. One evening, as he walked across campus, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus Reed. "Jamal, we need you at the community center this weekend. There's a case, another wrongful arrest. You in?" Jamal didn't hesitate. Absolutely. His name had become synonymous with resilience, a beacon of hope for those falsely accused. Through activism, mentorship, and legal advocacy, he vowed to dismantle the system that had nearly destroyed him. As he stood before a crowd at a police reform rally, he took the microphone and looked out at the faces before him. "We are not just victims," he declared. "We are fighters, and we will win." The crowd erupted in applause. Jamal Carter's story was no longer just about survival, it was about revolution.